The master, well, tracks are playing at once. These things called underruns happen. Now these underruns cause crackles in the audio, artifacts, that can be really quite annoying and can reduce these things called underruns accuracy of what you're actually hearing with regards to the final track. Going below this number, a lot of the plugins break instantly. Now with ASIO, which I can't switch to because it will break my recording, it allows for that near zero latency, but it locks it to FL Studio only, meaning I can't record. So all you have to do to take advantage of this is go to FL Studio ASIO and click the Show ASIO panel. It will be set to 512 initially, but if your CPU is good enough, you can turn it right down to 256, meaning only 6 milliseconds. Now of course plugins etc. add to that, but this initial number is a good 70 milliseconds less than with the default audio driver. Make sure you select the correct microphone for any recording that you want to do, and make sure that you select the correct output. But it's that simple to set up the near zero latency driver. If you don't mind a few artifacts and want less latency, you can turn off triple buffer. As you can see, that's taken off 6 milliseconds. But basically, the more complex your project is, the more you'll have to turn up this value. But first I'll try using triple buffer, because that adds a minimal amount of latency and can fix a lot of issues. I'm going to leave this unchecked for now, because I want the least latency possible. So that's how to set up FL Studio ASIO, something that I think is brilliant. It's a really good advancement by ImageLine. Now that that's set up, I'd like to talk to you about the interface. I'm going to make some more room here by just adjusting the width of this browser, which gives me more room for the other windows, which automatically resize based on their snap locations. So now that we've got a fully open project, I'd like to rewind a little bit and go to an empty project. This is what you'll likely see once you purchase FL Studio. So let's go on that assumption. So the first thing you want to do is, if you don't have a MIDI device such as this one, then you can just click a button on your keyboard just to see that the sound's working. If you see feedback here at the top center of the screen, but you can't hear anything, then you might want to check your output device and also ensure that the volume is at a suitable level. But once you've got that working, you could start constructing a very basic track simply by clicking on these buttons here. So now, everyone that's glowing or bright will cause the sound to be triggered. You can right click to disable them. An easy way to fill in these is to right click the channel in the pattern window and simply do fill each 2 steps. That saves you a lot of work. But to be honest with you, those sounds are okay, just to practice with, but they're not very good in terms of professional sound. So what you have to do to remove these is to right click them and click delete. And I tend to do this, you don't really have to, but it just cleans things up a little bit. Hold left click to add, hold right click to remove. Quite simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose from the plugin presets here a generator. A generator creates a sound. An effect modifies an existing sound. So we're going to go ahead with the generator and choose a simple preset, which is the default 3x oscillator. All you have to do to add this to your project is to drag it from the left-hand side Explorer window, and you can override an existing channel or just drop it underneath or above to create a new channel. I'm going to override the kick here. Now with FL Studio 12, much of the default plugins that come with FL Studio have been revamped. Their interface is very, very clean and very sharp indeed. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and use my keyboard for any generation that I do. But you can make do with a normal computer keyboard for the time being. So here you get a simple sine wave. 3 of them it looks like. That's panning, as can be shown by the symbol there. So as you can see, the interface is quite simple to use. This means square. This is looks like an additive one, sine and square. Triangle. Saw. Quite harsh. And noise. Very interesting. So yeah, it's quite easy to start producing things. As you can see up here, pattern 1 would suggest the first pattern, the first collection of notes. So all you have to do to actually put this into your project is to drop it here. If you hold Control and move the scroll wheel up, you'll find that there's actually some notes here. You can delve deeper by double clicking the pattern and it'll open it. This button switches between song and pattern mode. Highlighted or glowing means it's in pattern mode, which really doesn't do anything right now. And if you click it again, it goes to song mode. It's important to notice the difference between these two windows. This is just one element of a song, and this is the entire composition. How did I do that? The same way I did it in this window up here, left clicking. As you can see, it loops so you can listen to things over and over again with ease. To adjust the length of a note, all you have to do is click the end and drag it left or right. You'll notice that the next note you place is the same length as the last one you placed. So the program adapts to you being able to duplicate things. It's not called Fruity Loops for nothing. You can resize any of the windows simply by clicking and dragging their borders. So this is a simple way to create your first pattern in FL Studio. It's important to have as much control as possible over the notes you make, because how loud they are can be just as important as what note they are. I'll give you an example here by speeding up the pattern. I selected all 3 of these notes using a box select, which is possible to do by holding Control on the keyboard and then just dragging the area that you want to select. I can reduce the size of all the notes by clicking on any of the notes that is selected, and it will reduce all the others accordingly. This even works with different size notes. What I'm going to do in this case though, is I'm going to use this button. This button scales the entire pattern, which is really, really useful. Not only does it change their length, but it also changes their position. Snapping is really useful in this case, but if you want to override it, all you have to do when you try and resize a note is hold Alt, and then you can adjust it by any amount you want. While I've selected the object, I just hold Shift, click any of the notes that are selected, and drag wherever I want. It's not locked to the same note, I can increase their height if I let go of shift. I'm using space to start and stop the pattern. I'm using the same techniques here to build up my pattern even further. And you can copy and paste as many times as you want. As you can see, the pattern automatically lengthens. If you want to undo more than one step, you can't just press Ctrl Z because it will keep reverting between undo and redo. In order to undo multiple times, hold Ctrl and Alt. And as you can see, I've gone through multiple undo levels. Velocity is really important. Velocity is also known as volume. The only real use of the term velocity is with regards to MIDI input. MIDI input has 127 levels of velocity. Yeah, that's based on computer limitations actually. But as you can see, this defines the velocity of a note. I'll show you what this does once I've modified all of the notes. Now that is super important for drums. As you can see, once I've held Ctrl Alt Z, it opens the current project history. Now the current project's interesting because it shows you everything that you're using. Currently I'm using the Fruity Limiter in the mixer. This tells you a lot of the information you need. So as I'm hovering over these, feel free to take a look at what is being displayed. Now I call this the song view if you like, but it's technically known as the playlist. As you can see, even the shortcut keys are also displayed to the right hand side of that panel I just indicated. All you have to do to toggle these is to click them. Once they are open, they will appear on top of any other window, as can be seen by this. Now I've shown you the channel rack, the playlist, and the piano roll. The piano roll you can get to know as the individual patterns, if you like. But one thing I haven't shown you is the mixer. Now the mixer has been revamped in FL Studio 12. There are multiple different ways to view it. This gives you the most large display, but it's good to be compact if you're on any less than 2 monitors or a 4K monitor. Now the mixer is great, it's very adaptable in terms of display, but I want you to see the indication at this point, this highlighted green part, when I press a key. As you can see, that one is being triggered. This one is the master channel. This means everything goes through the master. Any effects you apply to the master channel apply to all the different channels. All the sounds have it. For example, if I applied a reverb to it, my entire song would have a reverb, not just the drums. So this isn't good, because this means that right now I can only control my one instrument through the master. Well, it's easy to resolve that. All you have to do is make sure that the channel of your choice is selected. Right click the mixer channel that you want to assign it to, go to channel routing and click route selected channels to this track. As you can see, the shortcut is Ctrl L. So now when I press, not only does it go through the master, because as I mentioned previously, everything goes through the master, but it also goes through channel 1 of the mixer. This means that I can apply effects to this without affecting the rest of the different instruments in my song. I'll give you an example here. So with FL12, the different effects have been categorized, so it gives you a bit more context about what they do. If we go to filter here, for example, I can click effector. This is a great versatile effect module. As you can see, it's not doing anything right now. This is because bypass is on. Turn off bypass and it'll actually be registered. Well, it's easy to resolve reverb. All you have to do is make sure the nice clean channel of your choice is selected. Right click the mixer channel that you want to assign it to, go to channel routing. So the two different route selected channels to this axes define, as you can see, the shortcut is Control L. Decay and the size of the reverb. Not only does it go through the master, because as I mentioned previously, everything goes through the master, but it would seem that the Y parameter defines the size, and the X parameter defines the decay, or how wet the reverb is. Now I want to prove to you that this is only affecting the first channel. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click this button here, and instead of going to the plugin database, I'm going to go to a snap that I created myself. It was originally called Snap 5, as indicated by the number, but I renamed it to Gen External, which means generators external. Plugins that are not native to FL Studio. Now technically FPC is, but it is a little bit difficult to access, so I've decided to put it here. I'm going to go ahead and drag this in. FPC is great because it allows you to drag samples onto each of these pads here, and you have maximum control over the sound of your drums. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as it is, but I want you to know the channels that are being triggered when I press a note. As you can see, master is being triggered, but there is no reverb. Now multiple channels can actually be assigned to the same mixer track, as can be demonstrated by doing the same thing I've already said. But we don't want that, so we're going to go ahead and change that. Don't worry about the fact that I routed it to this one first. Once you route it to another one, it will be disassociated from the first one, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and apply a Soundgoodizer. If we click this to make sure it's open, A is the lowest frequencies, which is good, it's bass. D, in contrast, is treble. Doesn't sound very good. Now, it's important to not overuse this. I usually keep it around here. So now we have our drum with a bass boost on it. And we have our oscillator. Now we want to put these two together. What I don't want to do is start editing the piano roll of the drum in the same pattern, because this means that we can't mix and match them as we choose. Instead, what I want to do is click the plus button next to the pattern and give it a name that's suitable. In this case I'm not going to, which you can do if you want. You can skip that simply by pressing enter, and it will remain as pattern 2. As you can see, I've now, just by clicking while I've got pattern 2 selected, I've now created the pattern here, which is currently empty. I want to work on pattern 2, but I don't want to listen to the rest of the song while I do. So all I have to do is click this button to make sure I'm in pattern mode. It's at the point in the game where I'm thinking, what kind of song do I want to create? Now, one of the most defining factors about this is the tempo. Different genres tend to have different tempo ranges. Electro tends to be pretty much always at 128 beats per minute. Dubstep can be between 140 to 150 BPM. Drum and bass can be between 150 to 170 BPM. Metal can be 170 BPM plus. Orchestral can be as low as 60 BPM. There is a massive range, and luckily FL Studio allows you to change that here. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to create an electro dance track. So I'm going to go to 128 BPM. I want to make sure that that sounds right, so I'm going to use a metronome. The metronome's great because if I was to record something, and there was a lot going on, or if, you know, I don't trust my own instincts to how large the interval is per beat for a 128 BPM song, for example, the metronome kind of gives me a bit of guidance there. Now I could do the same thing that I did with the original pattern, which was to place in notes manually, but instead I think I want to record. So all I do is press a big record button. Now for recording the keyboard, it's just the easiest thing to do is just to click everything. So when I press play now, it should give me a countdown. I want to make sure I've got the right tracks here, the right notes to press. There's a basic pattern. When I press stop, the pattern appears. Now, I must admit, even though I did have the metronome, my rhythm is not the best. So as you can see, it's not really with the lines of the track. Luckily, there's an easy feature to do this. If you want to do a few notes, box select them first, but if not, you shouldn't have to select any, and instead just press Ctrl Q to quantize the notes. This constrains them to the beats or intervals of the BPM, which is really helpful, and it allows you to clean up any sloppy mistakes. Now, it's not completely perfect though. I was so off tempo at the end that this is quantized to the wrong values, which you can see very clearly because that shouldn't be there. It should be here. As you can see, every other note starts on the big bold line, as should this one. So now if you play it back, if we turn off record mode, now as you've noticed, well I hope you have anyway, the pattern 2, which is my drums, has updated. It's got larger and it's got lots of notes in it. Now all I have to do to hear them both at once is to untick this and press play. Alternatively, you should just be able to click here, yeah, and that'll also disable that, which makes things a little bit easier. So not exactly going to be number one, but I think it's a good start. Okay, so we've got basic patterns down, but I want to change the sound of my sounds over time. How do I do that? Well, it's quite simple, really. As you can see here, we've got the mixer, and this is where you apply effects. I said earlier, generators make a sound, effects change the sound. Now I'm going to change what this effector does. I'm going to turn it onto filter. I'm going to go ahead and press the pattern button, and I'm going to navigate to pattern 1 by clicking this and dragging up or down to select the pattern that I want. Now I'm on the right pattern, I'm going to take a listen at what the filter sounds like. I'm also going to turn off the metronome. So I'm going to pick a position that I think sounds good for the start. About there. And now, all I have to do, because this is a native FL Studio plugin, to change it over time, is to right click the knob that I want to change over time, and create automation clip. I'm going to do the same for Y parameter as well. As you can see, some tracks have been created underneath our existing patterns. I'm going to switch to song mode right now, so that I can hear how my sound changes over time. And over time I'm going to make these about 50%, which is displayed in the same notification area as I've showed you previously. Now I'm going to change the curve of these just by clicking this middle control here. I'm going to start making my song a little bit longer now. I can either copy these just by doing that, Or I can extend them, just like I would with a note. Make them look roughly identical. Now you might want to start controlling these patterns a bit more. You might want to create a very similar pattern but not know what the exact values were, for example. And it's really easy to do this. Say, for example, I wanted to take this part and loop this part of the automation clip, but not this introductory part here. All I would do is use the slice tool, which is available just by clicking this, or by pressing C. And I'll take this pattern here of these automations and just cut them both in half. Now, this is quite good for duplicating this part alone. But if I change this part, then the other part changes too. Now that could be a good thing, but in this case, I don't think it is a good thing. I'm not a big fan of that. I want this one to be different to that one, but I want it to be based on that one to begin with, which is why I've copied it. To do this, all you have to do is click Make Unique. And now if you change the pattern, which is why I'm going to make this in line with the other end, so it doesn't sound quite as jarring when it switches back again. As you can see, it doesn't change this one over here. And I'm going to do the same with this one. And now I'm going to copy these to see what it sounds like. Now, as you can see, I'm zooming in and out quite easily just by holding Control and using the scroll wheel. Alternatively, if you do that over this, then you'll scroll up and down, and you'll scroll left to right here, like so. You can also use this control to change the vertical zoom, or hold Alt and scroll in and out instead of Control. So we've gone through the basics of using FL Studio, but what about if you want to expand on it with producer level plugins, for example? Some of you might have heard of Nexus or Massive. Well, installing these is quite simple. When you install them, you get a DLL that you put in your FL Studio folder. If you have lots of plugins, for example, and you don't want to store them on an SSD because of limited storage, just go to General Settings. Or in fact, it'll be File. And you can choose a folder to find the plugins from. Now I've already done this. But the issue is once you've loaded all your plugins, they won't be very easy to access. You'll have to go through the Browse All Installed Plugins and go to the VST folder and go through this entire list. Now that isn't very fun. And besides, you might have a preset in that plugin that you want to save and load very, very quickly. Which is why I've created my external snaps. Snaps basically save the state of the browser so you can switch between them. Right here I have a custom sound library called Vengeance for drums. I don't want to have to navigate it to each time, and if I open all the menus that I possibly want, it's going to get very, very confusing. So if you go to Snap 7, for example, and you want to just have one category on display, for example mixer presets, Snap 7 will now save that, and all you have to do to make it more informative is right click that label, and you can rename it something like Mixer Presets. So now when you click this, you'll see Mixer Presets is one of your snaps. Good, eh? I'm going to go to Generators External because I think I am missing a plugin. Hardcore Kicks Free Edition. Let's use that for example. Okay, so yeah, hopefully I'll turn that down in editing, but let's say I've got it like this. And I want to save this state, all that I've customized, and I want it to be easily accessible. I'm going to go to my Generators External. I'm going to make sure that this one is selected, and I'm simply going to go to this little arrow at the top left, Add to Plugin Database. It's going to be added to External, and there it is. Now this is fantastic, but what if I have multiple different hardcore kicks with different setups? They're all going to be called Hardcore Kicks VST Free Edition. Now this is a bit of an issue that I've discovered, that I'm not sure if I can solve it within FL Studio, but I do know that I can solve it. I'm not even sure what that's done now. I do know that I can solve it using the Windows Explorer. Now, what you'd have to do is navigate to your FL Studio file, go to Data, I believe, Patches, and then navigate to this Explorer here, Plugin Database Generators External. You should see the name of the preset that you've just added. I'm going to rename this to Hardcore 1. This is instantly going to break it. You need to rename the rest of the files. Now it's worth noting that it'll still be broken because this NFO file tells you what the image is called. Now I've just renamed the image, so I'm going to also update this. Yep. And save it. And it might take a second for this to work. That way I can just drag in my Hardcore 1, make some modifications to it, and then go ahead and click Add to Plugin Database again. Okay, there you go, there's the image updated now. If you don't want an image, just delete the image. And now I can go ahead and do the same thing. Drag it in there, and if I were to open my computer again, I could go ahead and rename that, call it Hardcore 2. And it's that simple. This is really, really useful in a case such as this. Here's Kontakt. Great plugin player. Lots of different sound libraries here. But the Giant is a piano. There is not much flexibility to it. That's what it is. And if I want a piano, I don't want to have to open Kontakt, then go to there, then go to there. It's just more clicks. So all I had to do was open Kontakt, load the Giant, save it as a preset or add to plugin database, rename it to the Giant in my computer, and there we go, we've got the Giant. I can do the same for example, the Rickenbacker bass, just to load that. The same can be done for effects. I can just go to the effector here, click down the drop down arrow, add to plugin database. I don't think it'll work adding it to generators, so you'd have to go to effects. You'd have to create a folder first, like I have done. And you can go add to plugin database. You can also just save the preset, which is useful for things where it's just slight variations of something instead of an entirely different instrument, like the Rickenbacker bass versus the Giant piano, that are both in the same plugin. But if it was the Giant piano echoey or something like that, for example Eternity or Dreamland, which I'll show you the difference now. I guess there isn't much difference between those two, but entirely different classifications of instrument within the same plugin should probably be saved as adding it to the plugin database instead of just a preset. Okay, so now I've shown you how to add your own plugins and be able to access them easily. The next thing I want to do is to say how to control external plugins. Now this isn't 100% accurate. It doesn't work for everything, but it does work for a lot of things. Let me give you an example here. Let's just close this because I have... There we go. Let's delete some of this just to ensure that performance is optimal. Because to be honest with you, I don't really like the sound of much of FL Studio's plugins. And if you want to delete one of these, it's as simple as going right click, delete file. Let's use Massive for this. Let's go for a dubstep bass. You'll notice if I right click here, I've got some options that don't really work because it's inside FL, and these don't communicate with FL Studio. However, there is a way to make it work. So multi-link to controllers allows you to define what virtual control is assigned to what FL Studio, or in fact physical control like a MIDI keyboard. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button here. It's now telling me to tweak the controller I want to control, and that's the LFO speed in this case. Firstly, if you wanted to use a MIDI controller with that control, if I tweak this, as you can see, the LFO speed is now tied to this. Which in fact I can, or should be able to record inside FL Studio. Let's add a new pattern for this. Now it's quite good to use that to record, but it makes modifying the automation there a little bit difficult. So you might want to control the speed separately. It's great for performing, but with regards to having the maximum control, it can be a bit difficult. So instead of doing that, what you can do is click the multi-link to controllers, click the LFO speed, and then you can right click this and create automation clip. So now click the paintbrush tool instead of the pencil, which allows you to paint as many times as you want. Now create a pattern in pattern 3, I'll hold that, and open the piano roll. It's important to note that this won't work while you're in pattern mode though. Click the pattern to make sure it's selected here. You can also select it via that, and paste that in. Now it doesn't sound very good. For a start, dubstep usually isn't at 128 BPM. The speed here is pretty terrible. But as you can see, the basic gist is using an automation to control external plugins. So now I just want to finish up, now that I've told you about how to use the interface, with going about composing a basic song. You define the BPM based on what genre you're going to use. That can be tweaked later if you want, but it's good to start out with a basic idea of what you need. Might as well remove that as well. So I know that I'm going to need drums. So the first thing I add is drums. Now most songs have bass. Massive's quite good for bass. They have a lead, which carries the bass line, which is the catchy part of the song. And then they might have some sense of organic instruments, such as a piano. So I'm going to use the Giant in this case. So that's all I really need to create a pretty cool song. But I want some drama in the situation, so I'm going to go ahead and use Contact. And I'm going to use this thing called Rise and Hit. This is really, really cool. I'll give you a sample of what it sounds like. Let's start deciding what sounds we want to use in our song. I'm going to reset this to empty. Now I've got my own sounds here, which are really easy to add. All you have to do to add your own samples is to go to the FL Studio folder, data, patches, user, and then you can put anything you'd like there, any folder. And then you can just create a snap by navigating to it. And as you can see, it's opened my folder here ready. So we're going to go with Electro. So I'm going to go ahead and click for an electro bass drum. If you're wondering how to add a MIDI device, just plug it in, wait for the driver to install, and FL Studio should have native support for it. It has native support for a large amount of instruments. I think I should make you aware of a certain thing which is really, really cool. If you don't own a MIDI device but you want something more tactile to use, for example a tablet or a phone, ImageLine have actually come up with a app called ImageLine Remote, which is free. You can get it from, I believe, both the Android and Apple app stores. You install that onto your device. You make sure it's connected to the Wi-Fi. You click Enable ImageLine Remote. You launch the device, and you should be able to see some controls there for pressing keys. But it's really good if you don't have a MIDI device. But there is some latency involved because it is over Wi-Fi. So now that we've got a basic drum kit, what we can do is make a basic pattern to see if they really do work out well together. So because I know which ones go where, I'm pretty happy with the sound of those. I'm now going to allocate them a mixer track so that I can control them further. So arpeggiation is where you take basically the rhythm of a song but you spread it across multiple notes. Or rather octaves. An octave is basically a group of 12 notes. You've got G3 and then you've got G4. So even though I'm pressing two different notes, because of the same note on a different octave, it doesn't destroy the rhythm as much. And I'll show you what I mean by that. And to finish off, so now we've got a bit of a groove going on. Let's look for a dance lead. That sounds quite good. I like that. Now at this point we've actually got very low notes there. So I'd rather have these approximately the same velocity. It doesn't have to be exact. But I want the higher notes to be a little bit louder than the others, to give more of a sense of rhythm. It's good to build up to higher notes sometimes as well, so we could do something like this, so these two low notes. If you want to change one of the notes that's overlapping, if it's part of a chord, just select that note, and the other one will maintain its velocity. So as you can see, I'm trying to make the lower notes lower than the higher ones, so an easy way to do that is simply just to select all the lower notes to ensure that they're all at least somewhat lower than the high notes. So right now, yeah, the low note's good down there, but after that one is kind of layered with the high note, I want to give a bit more presence to the low note after it, just to maintain its, dominance, if you like. I think that looks good. The shape looks good there. That doesn't need to be too loud though, because it is stacked with another one, so I don't want to overpower it. Pretty happy with that. Let's see what all three of those sound like together. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and add some piano inflections, if you like. So some flares. I'm going to change my octave on my MIDI keyboard. So one thing to note is some plugins can be a lot louder than others. The Giant is actually really quite quiet at the start, and Nexus is extremely loud. So it's at this point that I'm kind of prompted towards starting to master a little bit, or at least just mix, to get a better balance. So this is where I allocate each of my channels a mixer track. I'm going to go ahead and do this. As you can see, they're all currently just routed to the master, which isn't any good. So if you want to see the levels, you can see that this one, unfortunately, okay, so we're about -6 decibels there, whereas the sub bass is even lower, it looks like. Now the drums, you want to be slightly louder than everything else. There's multiple ways you can do this. These controls are very simple. You've got the channel volume and the channel panning. Panning is which speaker it's more dominant in. You know, songs are in stereo, left and right channels. And volume speaks for itself. So I'm going to increase the bass volume here. In fact, yeah, I'll increase the bass volume. I can change that later. So go in the master here. What's really important is for it not to clip. So currently, I'm sorry, I have to lean closer to my screen, it's quite difficult. That's one thing about the interface I don't like. We're hitting 0, I think that's because there is a limiter. Yeah, there's a limiter here, that's limiting it at 0 decibels. That's not good, we want it to naturally limit at 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn down our channels, we're going to start turning them down. So our master's still being hit quite harsh, and I think that's mainly because of the bass line here. No, it would appear that the sub bass is still far too loud. Nope. I'm going to go ahead and remove this limiter. Replace none. So I can get more, yeah, there you go. I can get more of a natural sense of where the tracks are. So now, even though we are technically nicely below 0, I would actually like to limit them a little bit more. What's important here is not the level of these knobs. These are an offset. What's important is the output value here. So my drums are maxing out at -3, which is great, whereas my sub bass is way down there. So I don't mind having a little bit more presence to my sub bass to go to about -6 decibels. Now this is quite quiet at this point because the limiter is not doing all of its quirky stuff. So we can actually turn this up now until we're comfortable. I'm happy with that, it's at about -3. In fact, I'll turn it down slightly and just turn up the sub bass a little bit. Bass is good. So this is basic mixing. Now if we look at our piano, look how low it is. So the first thing to do in this case is, because of the way that it's mastered, the easiest thing to do is actually to turn up the bass plugin. This will lead to probably the best outcome because it's a plugin that controls it before anything else. So now we're reaching a much more respectable value. Okay, so we've done some basic mixing here to try and actually be able to hear all of the sounds at the correct levels that we want and to decrease the chance of clipping. but as you can see, we're still peaking a little bit. It would appear that the drums may be a little bit loud. So what I'm going to do is going to continue to turn things down a little bit to make room for the piano. I might turn them up later when I do the mastering. So now I'm going to get a few phrases up here. Start our countdown. Excuse the poor playing. So as you're going to see, the pattern's not actually going to start at the start of the song, because I only started pressing a note here, so it's going to snap to the nearest 4 bars. Now we don't really want that in this case. We want to get more of a square lineup. So we're going to go here, turn off auto recording, and listen what the output sounds like. So that definitely starts at the wrong time. I'm going to go ahead and press Control Q to quantize the notes, make them a bit more accurate. Okay, so now that we've got a few different patterns working together in harmony, we want to start making the song have some progression. So we're going to move the main bulk of the track over here and think about how we can start. So that sounds more like an introduction kind of beat. So we're going to go to pattern 5 and we're going to clone that as well. We're going to remove that and replace it with pattern 6, the clone version. And now we can go. So give it a bit more of an introduction. So. So, these drums are pretty good, but they need a bit of variation, some breaks. Now, I wouldn't actually start with the pianos there. The piano has given the melody at the start here, which I want to add some evolution to, by the way, so let's go ahead and do that very, very cheaply, simply by choosing an effector, using what we used earlier, turn off the bypass. Choosing the path that we're likely to take, this is how I like to do it anyway. Okay, let's make this much more linear. Simply by using this control. That's a little bit sharp. I like that. It's important to maintain these at all times. If you get lazy with them, they'll stay in the same position and you won't realise how big an effect it's going to have on you. So it's important to, whenever it's going to be playing, make sure you've got a automation clip if you're going to control it at all. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before I finish off here is mastering. Now, mastering is basically giving room to each of your sounds so that it doesn't become muddy, and reducing excess sound in each instrument to make room for others. So what I usually do is use two things. I use a compressor. This is for drums, so I'm going to make the ratio 20:1. Meaning there isn't much difference between different volumes. I'm going to increase the gain here so it'll initially be louder. And I'm going to add some EQing to it. Parametric EQ. So as you can see the different frequencies that are being triggered, if you like. And what I want to do is pick some different ranges that I want to boost and some that I want to decrease. So this is for the kick. So around C2. The snare's more of a middling frequency. And the hat is towards the higher end, but I don't want it to be too high, so I want to boost the lower end of it. So what I've done here is I've highlighted some areas that I want to save for the drums. Now if I was to add boost this part for the bass, it would get a little bit muddy, but instead I can just boost around here and they won't have such a negative effect on each other. So I'm not going to bother with the compressor for this part. But it's important to choose wisely. Now the sub bass is great, but it's quite difficult to hear under the song anyway. Whereas this frequency range is very, very present. If you want to lower all of them at once, you can just do that. As you can see, there's no frequencies being generated there. So now I've made room for both the drums and the bass. At this point I need to check that my song isn't clipping, which it would appear it is slightly. So this means more turning down.